sounds good. Okay, so so we practiced analyzing these to find out the themes, and then we kind of talked about the ones that were coming up. So how comfortable do you feel doing this work? There's a couple of videos that I posted for Saturday's class that sort of talked about coding and memoing. So
I mean, it's kind of compiling in a way.
yeah. So this PowerPoint that's we looked at during class, I'm just going to walk through a couple of those things on there so you know what those things are.
And this is on Blackboard?
This is on Blackboard and the discussion, class number 3 PowerPoint.
Yeah, I went over that, but I have questions.
Okay.
So
Okay, so you can ask while we go through here. Okay. So basically, qualitative validity is different than. So we talked a little bit about like objectivity and statistics and why people feel really comfortable with quantitative data and they feel more uncomfortable because qualitative data is subjective. And someone asked, well, does that make you uncomfortable that it's more subjective? And I'm like, no, actually, that's what makes it, in my opinion, better data. Because it tells you more about a situation when you have more insight into what's happening than just statistics or just a survey response. So, so we talked about that. So the focus is really on how you collect data and making sure that the process is valid. Not so much what you're concluding is, but how you're doing it has validity. So process validity is basically the idea of triangulation. So if somebody ran in here right now and took my phone and ran out, and you thought that the person had a black coat on, and you thought the person had a black coat on, then that's probably a pretty good idea that it's probably a person with a black coat. But if I also say that he had a black coat on, then we feel pretty confident. That's just basically triangulation. The more that 3 points of data that agree is considered to be believable, more believable. And we use the word verisimilitude, which in qualitative analysis, which just basically means given the information, that makes sense. That's believable. So process validity is just the idea that if you have 3 points of data that agree, you've collected enough information, at least. I mean, you can collect more than that. But if you have multiple pieces of information that are all saying the same thing, then you've committed to trying to see that thing from different perspectives. Outcome validity is just basically, so we use this in teaching, studying teaching, and if you do something in your class, and then if you do a certain strategy, and then something happens, and the kids respond differently, something happened. So the outcome was changed as a result of what you did. It doesn't mean it was good or bad, or you don't even know what it means. Just that something happened. So there wasn't nothing. So it's just the validity that says something you did something. That's all. It doesn't mean anything more than that. But the fact that you've made some change happen would suggest that something's happening, even if you don't know what. Okay. Democratic validity is to make sure that you have perspective of multiple stakeholders in the process. So you don't want just one group of people sharing their views on something. But you don't want just interviews with, well, it depends on what you're doing, but you want to make sure that you've included the people in the process that would most have valuable perspective on that, or the kind of information in the process that would inform the question that you're asking. If you're going to ask a question about something at Chico State, you don't want to go ask a bunch of people at UCLA the question, right? Mm-hmm. So again, this is just on the process. So you're just thinking about, are you engaging the right people in the conversation around that information? Catalytic validity is a little like outcome validity in the sense that, but it's really about has what you've done informed everyone's understanding in a new way. So it might not be that you have the conclusion per se, but that the process of going through the data collection has better informed everyone's understanding of the situation. So it acts as a catalyst for more learning. So qualitatives about what you conclude, but it's also a lot about what happens in the process of the data collection. That's all a part of what you learn. The word we use to describe that is heuristic. Something that is the learning is the doing is the learning. So sometimes it doesn't matter what you end up with, but it's that you learned how to do it or you learned something along the way. And then dialogic validity is the idea that talking about it with other people helps you better understand what you're seeing. So when we were analyzing this data in pairs and small groups, and then two groups got together and they talked about it and they said, oh, that I understood it this way, or so you're able to crystallize your understanding more carefully if you have multiple ways of thinking about what you're seeing. This is important in qualitative data because if you're just sitting alone in a room and looking at information and saying this means that, I mean, that's all you got. And there's a lot of things that impact your perspective. And that's okay. And that's, in some ways, that's really good. Like, you should think about what those things are that are impacting your perspective, too. Like, I'm from a rural community, and so my understanding of what this means is shaped by that. But then you also want to have, in order to have a clear understanding of the information you're looking at, you want to have different perspectives that inform that. So that's dialogic. So the process we used to do this data collection, this data analysis was constant comparative. It's also sometimes called grounded theory. And that just basically means you're using the data to come to some understanding about what you're looking at. And basically it uses two forms of analysis, deductive and inductive analysis. I never really remember the difference. I always have to look. I'm getting better now since I just taught on Saturday, but deductive analysis is when you have a set of data and then you pull themes out. So what this pair did was deductive analysis. It looked at this raw set of data, it's sort of secondhand data because I took the information from your posts and then I did this. And you took that information from articles.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit like 3 steps away.
Yeah.
It's not, I didn't work with a primary source here, but I'll show you where I did in just a minute. So that's where we did deductive analysis, and we said these are some themes that we pulled out. Okay, and then we looked at we read this story, which you can read if you want. It's a story about a teacher up in paradise. Did you read it? Yeah. And then I just first shot at it. This was just my first initial attempt to pull themes out of that story. And this time, I cut and pasted language from the story directly. So with that, a little different than this one, right? Like this was a little bit more loose.
Right.
So this one, I pulled quotes from the story. The themes I found were finding meaning, pitching in, and loss.
And those are examples of deductive, right? Deductive.
Yes.
Finding.
Right. So I was doing a deductive analysis. I was reading through it, and I was just letting those things speak to me. And I was saying, well, these things, we'd say what likes what. So these things kind of like each other. They're similar in what they're saying. And we did an activity in class, that helped us kind of think about how to see when things are alike and when they're different, or when they might share a meaning in some way. And there's no right or wrong. Some people might think sometimes things share meanings across. Like I might have a statement up here and a statement down there that also are connected under maybe a different theme descriptor. So there's not really a right way. The important thing is being able to explain why you chose that title, that term as your theme, right? Okay, so I'll come back to that in a second with pitching in. So here's my deductive analysis. I used Ms. Bailey's teaching story, and these are the 3 themes I pulled out. So deductive. So here's inductive analysis. I have a predetermined theme, and then I go look at the different sources of data. Sometimes I'll read a research study, and they'll say, here's a theme. And I might then take that theme and go look for that in the things in my data. In our example, what grounded theory is it's iterative. So we do deductive and inductive and deductive and inductive. We sort of play back and forth trying to make sense of things. So I could take one of my themes that I pulled from my deductive analysis, and then I could go back and look at, I could go back and look at the Bailey story again and see if any other data maybe speaks to that. Or I could take that theme, finding meaning in crisis, and then go look at another teacher story and another teacher story, and I could look at for that theme through all of the teacher stories that are on that link that Kim's posted. So I'm building my theory about what this event means for teachers and schools. That's what I do with qualitative constant comparative analysis. So this is just some characteristics of constant comparative analysis and why we use it. It's not really that important to know that, but the 3 stages, so then we started doing this. So we did some open coding, which is these things that we did. We came up with some codes and some themes. Axial coding, so a couple people did this. So like Trey used these, and he sorted these, and he said, so I sat down, and the first thing I thought was, I think these are physical support and emotional support. And then he grouped them. And then he was like, but I don't know, maybe this is a third type of support. And so then he grouped them into 3. And then he said, well, maybe I should think about it as resources. And so then he shuffled the cards, and then Jacob looked for the frequency of terms. So he said resources was used 6 times. So we talked about, okay, so it's useful to look at the data and say how many times was this word used. But then you have to also look what was meant by that word in context. And sometimes that might mean going back to the original source of data. And I said you might have to go back to that person's post and see what they meant by resources. And does it mean the same thing as that? Doesn't matter, except that you just are able to sort that information into pieces, into chunks, so that you can make sense of it. Does that make sense? Okay. So, and then selective coding. So then you could take a theme and go back. So I'll tell you, so let me come back. Let me keep going here, and then I'll come back to the assignment. So writing memos. This is really helpful because as you're doing this, you might do a couple different iterations of looking at the data, and you might forget about what you saw. So writing down information about, okay, the first time I did this, I defined physical support and emotional support, and these were the kinds of things that I was seeing. Just to give yourself some information about that so that you can go back. Sorry. And then, so and theoretical notes are things like, I read about this in the research, and what I'm seeing here actually agrees with that, or actually doesn't really agree with that in these ways. Making note of that, so that, because the research can also be another point of confirmation in your triangulation process, for example. Okay, so here's my memo about Ms. Bailey. So I had this, in my first run through, I picked the themes, and I picked pitching in as a theme. But as I looked at it again, I thought, well, I wrote coded pitching in, but the 2 examples are not about the same type of contribution. One was during the fire, her recognizing the need to get everyone down the hill. The second data piece is the idea that other people still need to remember that this crisis will last for a long time. But both examples seem to speak to this teacher's recognition that things need to get done and someone needs to do it. So I'm kind of asking myself, do I really love that title for that theme? Is that, maybe I need to think differently about that. So this is my memo to help me to remember what I was doing with that. So basically I'm looking for some information as I look through my sets of data, and every time a common theme comes up, which is the red C in this, if I can get that to come up 3 times or more, then I feel confident that that's something that's coming out of here that's of importance for me to look at. Right? And then we talked a little bit about writing up your findings. So when you talk about your data analysis, you don't say, I did some surveys and here's what they said. I transcribed my interviews and here's what they said. That is like an annotated bibliography. So an annotated bibliography is you summarize an article, you summarize an article, you summarize an article. But a lit review is, here's what the research says about trauma. So-and-so says this, and so-and-so agrees with them, and so-and-so disagrees with them. That's the difference between an annotated bibliography and a lit review. So this is the same thing. Instead of saying, here's what this piece of data said, here's what this piece of data said, here's what this piece of data said, you say, here are my conclusions about the data. I found that trauma was a common theme across teacher stories and blah, blah, blah. And I could see that in data point number 1, I mean, not say data point, in the story about Ms. Bailey, where she talked about this. I saw it again in the story about so-and-so, right?
Mm.
Okay. So, the assignment for next time, we have assignment for class, which is to do additional rounds of data analysis. So everyone's put their data from Saturday into this new spreadsheet in Google Sheets. And you can also add, I mean, you can add your data in here. So you would just add rows underneath your name. And I have them by person because we were like, oh, what does that mean? And then somebody could say to Isabel, what did you mean by that statement here, this question, if they needed more information. And then we actually added a column on Saturday of type of data source, just because we thought, I don't know, it might be interesting or useful to know what we're looking at. Because some of you might be interested to look just at teacher stories, or, I don't know. We just threw it in there because we thought maybe that would be helpful to think about. And sometimes people like Jacob put a link to his story. So you could also say, you could go back and look at it, or ask Jacob, oh, I want to read that article from the ER. So go in and add rows underneath here, and add your data. I mean, nobody else probably is going to see it, but your purposes you might. Yeah. And then what people did is they downloaded the document from the sheets. You don't want to do it in the Google Sheets because it'll change it for everyone.
We're adding it there, right?
You're adding it in Google Sheets.
And then we're just adding like a one sentence kind of thing?
Yeah.
Or?
So what we decided was, the reason why why I asked you to think about in terms of questions, what kinds of questions does this raise for you? Because what we're doing is we're trying to come up with questions to research. So I just, as opposed to a theme, I asked you to think about what kinds of questions are raised as a result of looking at that data or in that data. So, I mean, that's not that typical that we would collect data in the form of a question. But because we're building questions, I just thought it would be interesting. I'm just sort of trying that out.
Yeah.
So you could look at, so I printed this off. These are just the questions. All right, well, if that's Kimberly, I'm gonna just send her the thing. You could do just the questions. So I printed this off just because there's a lot, and analyze just those if that interests you. Or you could do just the themes, if that was too much. Or you could pull out all the training pieces of data. I don't know. Look through the data and decide what interests you about it. You could try to tackle the whole lot of it. There's quite a lot there. So I don't know if that is going to, how you feel about that. But you could, think about it that way. But the idea is to go back into this data now. So after you put the data in on the Google Sheet, you can download the file. So you can just play in that all you want. You can sort in the Excel. You can use colors if you want to do your
That's
coding.
right, you download so you don't.
So you don't
As
mess
you're
up those
sorting, you're not
Yeah.
screwing up.
Right. Yeah.
Got it.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then just play through that and write some memos of what you're seeing. So that was the first thing. Do additional rounds of data analysis of the Excel data, and bring those themes and memos for next time. So most people are doing, I think, deductive analysis, and they're just going to sort through these things. But Randy said, I'm really interested in placemaking, and that didn't really come up anywhere in the data, that term. And then we talked about that because Jacob said, actually, I read an article that talked all about placemaking. They just didn't use that term. So then she said, well, what if I took the ideas we learned about placemaking, and then I used that theme to go in and look at the data, and that would be what kind of analysis, deductive or inductive?
Inductive.
Yeah, so that would be inductive analysis. So she was interested because she really wanted to look at that concept in particular. So you could do either one of those. Play with the data, think about it. It requires some time to just like, I was talking about meditating on data. You know, like it sounds stupid, but really, if you sit with it and you look at it and let it speak to you, things will reveal themselves.
Yeah.
And it's not really about is it right or wrong. It's about why is that coming up for you? Like what does that mean? Just as long as you're saying, here's what I think that means and why, it's fine. It doesn't have to be like that's the right thing. That's the right interpretation. So
we're coming up for more data within each person's data, or just for our own?
you're just putting your own data in. This is what people did on Saturday. They just added the data they brought on Saturday.
Oh.
Because you were asked to bring additional articles.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so we would add our additional articles that would have done Saturday,
Yep.
plus additional ones
For next week.
for the next class.
No.
Oh,
For the
okay.
next class, you're just analyzing the data we have.
Oh, okay, we don't need to bring
Yeah.
it.
No.
Okay, but, okay.
You're adding. So we have. So you had 2 from the post, and then maybe 2 that you brought to class. So each person have about 4 sources of data, or more if you wanted, but
Okay.
about that in here, and then you're gonna just do some analysis of that data.
Okay, and write the memos on those data that we already collected.
Write the memos on the data from this spreadsheet, this Excel sheet.
For all
Everyone's.
of those? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So not just yours, everyone's.
Yes.
Yeah.
For
Or-
the memos.
Or right, a subsection of it.
Okay.
Yeah. But
So
not just your data across everyone's.
So you choose like a theme of what calls my attention.
You can, or you can do deductive analysis.
Mhm.
See how they just let this data come up. They just look for the themes in this data.
Yeah.
Now, this file's just bigger.
Mhm.
It's that plus the new stuff, and you could just do deductive analysis from this.
Okay, I
Yeah.
see what you're saying.
Or if you're really hot on a different topic, you can go in and look for that. Okay. So that's the data work. And then once you've done that, I want you to choose the theme, either the one you were looking for or the one you found, and find some scholarly articles about that. Because the next thing we're going to do is build a research, a literature review. And I think we're going to do it as a group. I did that one other time and it was challenging, but Google Docs are my friend. So choose a theme from the data, whatever you decide to come out of all of those rounds of analysis. Find some scholarly articles about it and read at least one of them. You don't have to read all of them. If you can bring the titles of several,
Okay,
that's
how many
great.
would you like people to find?
I don't know, 3 to 5, or I mean,
Find 3 to 5,
Yeah.
but you really only need to read
One.
or
yeah. I think if you just read, I want to be realistic. It'd be good if you read one, because we'll probably read others after that. But I just want you to come prepared to work with one that you've
have
read.
at least
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then online 3 is due in 2 weeks, and that is identity in rural contexts. So we assigned the articles, and if you weren't there, you just got assigned one.
Yes. you
Yes.
said
So
the
you're
LGB.
right. That's yours,
Yes.
and yours was the politics one.
Yeah.
Even though you don't like politics, I said you're still getting politics. Although he said that it has, Jacob said it has quite a bit of economics in it too, which is why he picked it. And then this article, which is a short article. It's a little academically dense in its vocabulary, but it's talking about how you research marginalized communities or traumatized people or oppressed people. So I think it's just an interesting thing for us to think about. Not that we're doing that right now, but if we were to go in to do research during this time, it would be. Now we're doing sort of just review of the literature of the information that's out there, not of people directly. Although, I mean, Katrina's whole family. I mean, Katrina's in our class, probably most directly impacted by the fire. So it has implications for us as well,
Sure.
but I feel it's also a little bit like we're a little bit one step away from kind of what that article's talking about. But I think it's important to have as part of our conversation, especially as it relates to identity, because we'll talk a little bit about the complexity of identity in life, in rural places, in this particular post-fire context. So those are all, questions.
So on line 3 is the article we're assigned plus that other article, and
Right.
whatever
And then the
instructions
and then
are
the
to
post,
tell us
yeah.
what to do.
Yep.
The memos, are we supposed to send them to you? Or?
Nope, you just bring
Or
those
just
for
you?
class. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
The memos are just for you to keep track of this information because
Oh.
you're gonna need that to talk about what you did and how
So we
you
won't
analyzed
submit
it.
the memos?
Nope, those
Okay,
you're just
for
gonna
members.
bring them to talk in your groups about
Got it.
what did this mean. Yeah. Memos are for the researcher. Okay.
That's it?
Yep. Do you have any questions?